Hello, Booktube. As I've mentioned in a couple of videos, there's upheaval in the mass transit system of Greater Boston. The Boston subway system is a multicolored line, a group of lines, the red line, the green line, the blue line, the orange line. And the orange line and parts of the green line were shut down for maintenance. Not little bits of them, not a few stops at a time, but the whole of the orange line from one end to the other for a solid month. And Boston prepared ahead of time, called in a fleet of shuttle buses to replicate the route so that people who rely on that route to get to work, go to hospital appointments, whatnot, would be able to use it. And I viewed it as my municipal duty to double check on that route. I tried it once just to see what it was like. That was my historical duty. Can't live in Boston. This has never been done before. I couldn't live in Boston and not experience it. But then I thought it was my municipal duty to check to make sure that those buses were running on time and in an orderly fashion. So I viewed it as my municipal duty to go to the Brattle Bookshop, to suffer through the hardship of large, plushly appointed, crisply air-conditioned, professionally run luxury coaches in order to go to the used bookstore in the heart of downtown Boston. So I did that selflessly. And I had a wonderful time. I was there this morning before the heat of the day really built in. I had some wonderful talks with the long-suffering staff who puts up with me there. I found a ton of books. At one point, I was hovering around the buying table, which is right inside the front door, where there's just piled. That's the books that are going hither, thither, and yon, whether they're going outside or they're going to the various bookshelf shelves. That's where they go first. And so it's always fun to see the changing face of the buying table. And I was hovering around there with young Connor, who learned about the Brattle from my channel and decided to apply there. And we were chatting when this couple came in and said they were looking for a book for their daughter. And she said, "Get me a cool old book, something historical." And that covers quite a lot of ground, and Connor, bless him, he must have seen my beagle tail go up, because for 25 years, that was the only thing I did in my bookshop. I was asked often to do lots of other things, but that was the main thing I did, was for people to come in with a seemingly impossible request like that, and just get me. Oh, well, let's talk about this. Let's find out what we can recommend. Connor just stepped aside, and I stepped right in, started asking a few questions, located the subject on the American Revolution, and then remembered that I had seen a copy out in the sale lot of Patriots by A.J. Langguth, which is a history of the American Revolution that I've recommended on this channel many, many times. A sale lot. Do you want to get down here, baby? Or are you just doing yoga? Come on. Come on, just... No? There you go. Oh, don't stop. There you go. All right, there you go. I've recommended Patriots many, many times, and I remembered when this couple made that request, I remembered that I'd seen a copy out in the sale lot. We got here. There we go. Which is extra service, because the sale lot is not organized, except by price. So I dragged them out there, and I found a copy in perfect condition. Mint condition trade paperback. I handed it to them, and it was wonderful. It was a little taste of the past, what it was like for me to deal with customers. I don't deal with bookstore customers anymore. I'm never going to again. And no bookstore would have me. I'm not willing to work 40 hours in a cafe being yelled at by an 18-year-old. I'm not willing to enter a retail workforce, the prime tenet of which is that there's no such thing as experience. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to hurt the customers that way. So I'm never going to get a chance to do it unless the occasional customer wanders into the Brattle when I'm there, like happened today. So that was a joy. That was an absolute joy. And as I mentioned, I found a pile of books. And that felt more and more dodgy as I went along, because I knew the train and walking and bus commute that I would need to get back. But it all worked out. So I wanted to show them to you. On a particularly haul-heavy day for Booktube, I've seen a couple of book haul videos. That's just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Ollie did one at CriminOlly. Jason Harrigan did one. Came out of semi-demi retirement to do a book haul. And that's just wonderful to watch people. You know, the book hauls, you get two kinds of book hauls on Booktube. You get book hauls from young people who will tell you why every book in their book haul intrigued them. And then you get book hauls from people who have been around the block a few times who will tell you things about the books and about their reading history with the books. It's an education either way. So I've got a lot of these things that I want to show to you. We'll start with a rebuy. Didn't recognize it at first. It's not the exact form of this book that I want, but all these things were store credit. They were all free. It was only a question of carrying them. That's all. This was an entirely cost-free day, other than manual labor, because those luxury air-conditioned shuttle buses are free. Your subway fare does not count. You're not paying a subway fare when you get on or off them. So, but this is the art book by Faden, which I've shown you on a number of library tours. But it also comes in a larger hardcover, and the larger hardcover is the thing that I want. I found another little paperback version of it, but it looks different than mine. It looks like this. But it's the same book. I checked, and it's amazing. It's page after page of art, a single piece of art on each page. The piece of artwork is analyzed, and a little bit of the biography of the artist is given. There's Landseer, my own favorite, and there are a whole bunch of others here. You get Kandinsky and Picasso and Renoir and Corot and everybody. Ancient, modern, all of it. You know, they're the ambassadors. Holbein. The neat thing, I mean, you've seen many art books like that. One of the reasons why I want this in a hardcover, I saw one at the Brattle about 5 years ago. Didn't get it. I could kick myself. It will turn up. But in the meantime, a second paperback is always helpful, because the more I use this, the more I worry about breaking it. But the great thing about this that's different from other art, pictorial books, is that it's alphabetical. All the entries are alphabetical, which means you are going to get juxtapositions that you would never have imagined. And every single page through of this book feels completely fresh, because you don't know what's coming. When you have a big art history book in full color reprints of artwork that's set up according to period and time and whatnot, or artists in school, you know what's coming. But here, no, it shakes the predictability off it completely. That's why I love this thing. And I've had a few copies of the little paperback of the art book, but I didn't know that it had such a fancy cover like this, such a fun cover. So I grabbed it. Then I got a mass market paperback, the only mass market paperback today. This is a pot-boiling novel from the 1970s, I bet. 1979. When these big rich man, poor man, the bastard type, big panoramic generational novels were the deal. They were the whole thing. They were the cat's pajamas, so everybody wrote them. This is by James Kavanagh, and it's called A Coward for Them All. And it is the story of an Irish Catholic family, but the story, if I remember correctly, I read this when it first came out, believe it or not, in a paperback just like this. But this is not my paperback. And it's a story of an Irish Catholic family through a couple of generations, but it revolves around one particular member of that family, a priest, who is erotically tempted. Look at that cover. Look at that back cover. That is just amazing. I haven't read this in 50 years. I can't wait to give it another try. I remember kind of liking it. The author was extremely smart. So even when he was writing down to the conventions of a big, rich man, poor man panoramic novel, he couldn't do that quite. You can't erase your intelligence when you do that. No matter what anybody says, you can't do that. I remember really kind of enjoying parts of it. But this author has a fascinating life on his own. And this book did well. I think it was an alternate selection for Book of the Month Club, something like that. Or did well for, its original sale or whatever. But it wasn't his hit. This author had a nonfiction hit. I don't remember the name of that nonfiction hit, but I read it at the time. Oh my God, everybody read it at the time. He was a priest. And he was an unconventional priest. He was a firebrand critic of the Catholic Church. And a lot of its policies, both known and unknown, both clerical and anti-clerical. And he left the church. He left the priesthood. And I believe there was a dramatic moment where he ripped his priest collar off and threw it on the ground. And just said, I'm never going to wear this again. Enough of this. But he wrote a book about his church, about the Catholic Church, about what it was like in his day and age. And it was rabble-rousing. There were quite a few parishes in Boston that you would have been in serious trouble with the Monsignor if it was known that you had a copy of that book. I don't know that it was ever officially banned in Boston, but it was a scandal of a book about written by a priest about the shortcomings of the Catholic Church. I wish I could remember the name of that book. I wonder if it's in here. Would it be in here? No, it won't be in here. Well, that's all right. I'm not sure that I'd be all that interested in that nonfiction book now. When it comes to living memory scandals of the Catholic Church, when James Kavanaugh wrote that book, he had no conception of the sex scandal that was coming to the Catholic Church, which eclipsed everything since the Renaissance, and the full extent of which is not known to the public. So, reading his book about how boring masses are or whatnot, it'd probably feel like small potatoes. But his fiction, I have a strong suspicion. I vaguely remember most of this book. I have a strong suspicion that his fiction is better than I remember it. So I'll definitely give this a try. I know that he wrote at least one other novel. I can't remember the name of it, but I wish that I'd found it. I looked, because I figure if you see something like this, probably you'll see more like this. But this is not the first. This is not the first of these big potboiler 1970s canvas style historical novels, generational novels that I found at the Brattle recently. So it could be that someone sold them a whole box full of these books rather than pursuing one particular author. Can't wait to reread this, though. There's the priest collar discarded as he gets about the hanky-panky. So that was the only mass market paperback. Then we come to a trade paperback. Didn't think I would ever see this thing again. Very happy about that. This is Imperial Governor by George Shipway. And it's this historical novel about the great revolt that I now have to call the Revolt of Boudicca. I have to call it the Revolt of Boudicca. And the reason I have to do that is because the Edwardian age is over. I can no longer refer to it as the Revolt of Boadicea. I can no longer do that. I have to call it the Revolt of Boudicca. Which is a massive revolt that took place in Roman Britain and was dealt with by the Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, who's not the same as the Suetonius of the 12 Caesars. And this was George Shipway's first novel, which he wrote when he was ancient. He wrote it when he was like 60, 65, something like that. And it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. It goes from big, again, panoramic scenes and set pieces to tiny little moments that are delightful. Absolutely delightful. And this is a sore spot for me. Years and years and years ago, long before most of you were born, I recommended this to an up-and-coming young literary critic who wanted my recommendations of all kinds of books. Even got him a copy. And he read it, and he called it boring. Boring. Now, I try not to hold that against that. Yeah, that critic has gone on to fame and fortune as a fiction chronicler for the Wall Street Journal. I try not to hold it against him. Our reading tastes can't all be identical. This is not a boring book. This is not a boring book. I am looking forward to reading this again. Roman historical fiction. But I never thought I'd see this. This was the exact copy that I gave that errant book reviewer. And I never thought I'd see it again. So there it is. Then these next three, I actually have a prop. I actually have a prop. Because these are all of a series. A lovely series. Beautiful trade paperback series. And the prop is this, which we've already seen in a Brattle Hall. This is Down Channel. One of these, who is this? Grafton books, where you get the this beautiful nautical cover art, but with no falderall on the cover other than that. Just very graceful design there. And the reason this was on my mind is because I was just reading it this morning. But I was at the Brattle, and I found a bunch of them. Couldn't be any happier. There's this, The Cruise of the Amaryllis. Same design. This is Granada, but the Grafton Granada, banana, whatever it is. This is the same thing. And this is, what is this? George Mulhouse, in 1920, he left Plymouth to circumnavigate the globe in his 62-foot yacht, the Amaryllis, which at the time was the smallest ship ever to attempt to circumnavigate the globe. This will be much along the lines of Down Channel. It will be just a fantastic... I guess this was a whole library of minor nautical classics. Maybe, for all I know, maybe major nautical classics. Did Grafton ever do 2 Years Before the Mast? Or anything? I'd love to know. I now want to know all the books that were in this list. I don't know how many of them I'm going to find, but this next one, for instance, Miles Smeaton, Once is Enough. Miles Smeaton, not to be confused with Mark Smeaton. If I am in a very much a Tudor frame of mind, Mark Smeaton's name will be known to you Tudor fans. This is not Mark Smeaton. The Mark Smeaton from the Tudor story, the famous, infamous, poor, doomed Mark Smeaton, would have got seasick if he'd crossed a puddle. Whereas this, Miles Smeaton wrote this with his wife, Beryl, I think was her name, and they decided they got a ketch of modest size and decided to retrace the steps of the old clipper ships, the routes of the old clipper ships, including sailing around the Horn, around Cape Horn, which is not a fun thing to do in a wind-driven vessel. Believe you me, it's not. It's not a fun thing to do, even in a diesel-driven vessel. That cover is a mild case of what you got, and this is one of their memoirs. These two wrote a lot of books, if I remember correctly. And I don't have any of them. I've read a bunch of them. I had access to a rather extensive nautical library at an old house on Cape Cod years and years and years ago. And I am sure if I rack my brains, if I rack my memory, I'm sure that I would remember a version of this, not this pretty paperback, but a version of this I'm sure was in that library. Every nautical book imaginable was in that library. But I bet a lot of the Smeaton's other books were in there too. And I'm not looking to gift horses in the mouth. Very happy to have this. I now have kind of a small collection of these things, and who knows if there are more coming. The last one of them is a name that might be known to you Star Trek fans. This is A Mainsail Haul by John Masefield. Went on to become a poet laureate. He became famous for his poetry and is one of the poets mentioned in canonical Star Trek. in one of what is, I would argue, a large number of very charming moments in Star Trek V. A sort of despised Star Trek movie that I think it is despicable. It is bad, but it has wonderful, charming moments in it. And at one point, Masefield's name, believe it or not, comes up in that movie. A piece of nautical prose comes up in the course of that movie. I know it would never happen in Star Trek now, but a piece of nautical prose, a tagline from a nautical poem, comes up in that movie, and Dr. McCoy, Bones McCoy, says, "Ah, yeah, Melville," and Spock immediately corrects him and says, "John Masefield." And they give D. Kelly a perfect comic moment. They let him do it. They let him. He had really good comic timing. All the old television hack actors had perfect comic timing, and they let him just play out the moment for a minute and say, "Could have sworn it was Melville." That is John Masefield's, oddly enough, biggest claim to pop culture fame. But I have never read any of his nautical stuff. I don't know if he wrote any nautical stuff other than this. I know about this book, but I've never read it. Fantastic to have it. So I've got this little library of these nautical classics, whether it's Grafton or Granada. I don't really care, one way or another. I'm hoping that more of them show up at the Brattle. I could kick myself. When I got back here and I was looking at these things, I realized that sometimes when you've got that pricing table right inside the front door, sometimes things scatter in opposite directions. So what I really should have done if I was interested in more of these old Granada paperbacks was to go upstairs and look at the nautical section, where a lot of them might have ended up. But I didn't do that, and maybe there'll be somebody else's find. I'll see what I find next time I go. Then this next one is a Holmes pastiche novel. That I've never heard of. I'm not sure this was ever printed in the United States. I don't remember ever seeing it. Can't wait to read it. Of all the books that I got today, and we're not nearly done, it's one of the strongest calls to read right away. It's by Robert Ryan, and it's called The Dead Can Wait, a Dr. Watson thriller. Not Sherlock Holmes, but Dr. Watson. What have we got here? Dr. John Watson is back home, fresh from his time in the trenches of Flanders Field. The horrors of war weigh heavy on his mind, and now his task is to help rehabilitate soldiers suffering from the crippling effects of shell shock. But the war is not yet over, and in one corner of England lies a secret, one that the establishment is determined to keep under wraps. Here they are developing the land ship, never before seen, tanks, which the army is convinced will end the stalemate on the Western Front. But then disaster strikes. After a training exercise in one of the tanks, 8 men are mysteriously struck down, 7 of them dead. There is just one survivor, and he's not talking. It is clear something is horribly wrong, and with Sherlock Holmes indisposed, the army calls on the only man who can help, Dr. Watson. I've read many a Watson adventure, both in Ellery Queen and Alfred Hitchcock murder mystery square-bound periodicals, and also in novels. They don't often work. don't think I'm offending anyone to say that. They don't. I think most Holmes fans would agree that even the two stories in the Holmes canon that are narrated by Holmes instead of Watson don't particularly work. You need the dialectic between the two of them. No offense to Laurie King, who's written a whole series with an older Sherlock Holmes where Watson is not in the picture, but she, in her own defense, she creates a new dialectic. But a Watson thriller on its own, we shall see. I'll be fascinated to know either way. Let's see here. Let's push ahead here. This next one is a perfect example of something I've mentioned that the Brattle allows, which is second chances. There are quite a few second chances in this Brattle haul. This, though, is recent. I had to check to see that it wasn't my copy. This came out in 2016. So maybe we've seen this on this channel. Maybe this was in a very early mail haul on this channel. It's from the great folks at Other Press, and it's Guapa by Saleem Haddad. And it's a novel about a young man in the Middle East who's gay, and he works as a translator for Western journalists and Western writers, but he can't really be himself. He has the full, passionate, fiery heart of his feelings, but he's hemmed in all around with societal and religious constrictions. And I read this back in 2016. I don't know that I ever reviewed it, but it's this lovely paperback with the French flaps from Other Press, and I remembered liking it. I think, if I remember correctly, back then I thought, well, I liked it, but I didn't love it. There's not enough one way or another to review. I would mostly just be summarizing its plot, so I'll pass on it. And I didn't keep it. And it stuck with me. When my friend Sam was over just recently, we were talking about that fact that you can never tell when a book is going to stick with you. We both agreed that the Books of Jacob has done that with us this year. But you never know when it's going to happen. It's the one thing you can't know as a critic is how long a book is going to stick with you or whether it is. There are plenty where I thought they would and they didn't. But this did. So I was very happy to find it. I just, at the Brattle, I was very happy to find it. So that now I can put it on the shelf and in due course, maybe early next year, something like that, reread it. So that was a sort of a second chance at the Brattle. And then this next thing is a Booktube event. It was another thing that happens at the Brattle that never happened for the first 70, 100 years that I was going there, was that Booktube can influence what I buy. And one of the Booktube events that's going on now that I'm a part of and having a ball watching the videos is Garb August, created by Ollie at CriminOlly and designed to celebrate the reading of trash, of garbage, and also to delineate what is trash and what isn't. And a certain book has come up in reference to Garb August a couple of times. So I think a couple of different channels. And I thought nothing of it. I don't think I even noticed that it was coming up more than once. But then I saw this at the Brattle and I had to grab it. It's Martin Cruz Smith. It's Nightwing, which is an very early novel of his about killer bats. And whether or not your book has a killer animal is one of the yardsticks that we're jokingly using to determine whether or not it's trash. Does it have a killer animal? In this case, thousands of killer animals. Also, another yardstick that I would use is it believable? Is it unbelievable? Do things act in an unbelievable way? It's not unbelievable, for instance, that in Jaws, a great white shark would kill a lot of people and sort of stick around in a coastal community. It's not normal for great whites, especially when in Jaws, Peter Benchley's original novel, there is no mention of a booming seal population. Right now, you take your life in your hands to go in the water or surf, especially off Cape Cod here in Massachusetts, because of a booming seal population. Word gets around on great white shark chat boards that there's ample food, and you either look just like a seal in murky Cape water, or you are swimming in a great white shark's hunting territory. Either way, they're going to bite you, and chances are you won't live through that. But that is at least partially believable. I eventually based Jaws on a series of shark attacks over a short period of time a century ago. So it did happen. It is mildly believable. The shark that shows up in later Jaws novels that obviously has a masterminding human intellect of its own, no. The shark that shows up in a lot of other shark movies and books that obviously have superhuman intelligence and malevolence, no. But that, yes. This, I read this when it first came out. I certainly didn't read it in hardcover. I don't remember what the paperback looked like, but I must have read the paperback. And I remember it being, even at the time that I read it, when did this come out? The 1970s? Waving it around without knowing that. 1977. In 1977, I was just beginning to become deeply involved in the study, including the field, of bats, Microcryoptera, echolocating bats. I was just beginning to become very involved with that. It's not something I talk about much on this channel. I don't stress it at all. I've never really gone into any details. But even back then, I knew that the bats in this book were sheer fantasy. And I wonder, I'm a lot more forgiving of that sort of thing now than I was then. Back then, I was just 28, whereas now I'm, oddly enough, 28. So I'm a lot more forgiving of that now, and I'll pay a lot more attention to the effective parts of this. I seem to remember there being effective parts to this. Couldn't resist the incredibly young cover. Look at that. He's a baby. All the times I've met this guy, I never looked anything like that. Just a tiny little baby. And this is about, obviously, as you can tell, a town that undergoes an attack from killer bats. And it came up a few times in reference to Garbaugust. The cover is a little off-stamped, but it was free. The only work involved was getting it back here, the lugging of getting it back here. So one last Garbaugust purchase. How's that for heartbreaking? Then we have a great novel of the 20th century. There's a Booktube tag going around, the new literary canon tag, that I've seen on a few channels, and the answers have been very interesting, but the tag itself is not actually an invitation for you to talk about what your new literary canon would be. It is instead, as Admiral Akbar would say, a trap. Or to quote from Tom Hardy in Mad Max, that's bait. The new literary canon tag is actually a thinly disguised purity test. It's not designed to know what you would put on a new literary canon. It's designed to test whether or not you were a good or bad person and maybe deserve cancellation. But if I were to do a 20th century canon, if I were to say top 50 novels, top 50 works of nonfiction for the 20th century, or the second half of the 20th century, this book would be on that list. It's a towering work. I wish that it were in print. I wish that it were better known. I wish that it were, maybe the New York Review of Books would reprint it or people would study it. Even so, this is my favorite edition of it. There's a boring-looking mass market paperback. There's a boring-looking trade paperback. But this is the old, who does this? Aventura? Yes, this is the old Aventura trade paperback of history, a novel by Elsa Morante. This is the English language translation by William Weaver, who did a ton of translations of all sorts of other Italian works, including works by Umberto Eco and a whole bunch of other people, and whose name came up in another book haul today. So not only did Ollie at CriminOlly post a book haul, and he's the master of ceremonies for Garbaugust, but Jason Harrigan posted a book haul in which he mentions William Weaver. What was the circumstance? Where did he encounter Weaver? Oh, he found a weird-looking, it looks like it was self-published, just run off at a bookstore, edition of a book by Luigi Pirandello, which is translated by William Weaver. And William Weaver's connection to Italian literature doesn't get much closer than his connection to Elsa Morante and her husband, the great Alberto Moravia. They are both great writers. Absolutely fantastic. Moravia is, I don't think, in print. This book, I don't think, is in print. I don't know what the 21st century is doing with 20th century great literary classics. But this is not only a great human novel. There are lots of things in here that wrench. They will stick with you forever. It's also a great World War II novel, one of the greatest World War II novels. And I found it in this old trade paperback, which has the soldier looking at a destroyed nave of a church. This is the version, this paperback. What did this originally cost? Oh, come now. Okay, well, this trade paperback says $10.95, but I certainly didn't pay $10.95 for my first trade paperback of this. More like $4. This is the version that I read one hot summer and fell in love with. And every time I've seen it since, I've seen it in some other version, including the mass market paperback in America was just monochrome red, I think. And I was snooty. I said, the Brattle will provide. I know what I want. I want to reread this book, even in English, but I want this version. And I found it. So the Brattle did indeed provide. Then this next one was in such horrible shape that I almost passed on it. And then I thought, well, if I pass on it, no one's going to take it because it's only going to get in worse shape and then get thrown away. I don't want it to face that. I liked this book. But it was in such bad shape that I barely got it back here in one piece and had to reinforce it before I could even show it to you. And this is Quentin Bell's biography of his aunt, Virginia Woolf, which was I had to sort of fix this thing. It was falling apart. But I looked at this. It's been at the Brattle a couple of times when I've gone there in getting in increasingly worse shape. And every time I thought, gee, somebody's got to get that. This is such an enjoyable book. I mean, you're obviously going to have problems with it, right? On one level, because what are you supposed to do when an adoring nephew writes a biography of his famous aunt? You're not really supposed to take that as biographically reliable. Was my original, somewhat priggish 20-something attitude, was you can't view it as reliable. My views, again, have broadened and become slightly nuanced, as nuanced as I ever get anyway in that field, that maybe an adoring nephew writing about his famous aunt would be more inclined, to be honest, than an adoring biographer who never knew her. In other words, my lone defense, I'm the lone defender of authorized biographies. The slander of authorized biographies is, well, if the estate is letting you rifle through their papers, they've obviously put the elbow on you and you're going to write an adoring portrait. I've often found there's a lot of subtlety in some authorized portraits. I don't think this is the authorized life. I could be wrong about that. There it is on the back. I don't think this is. I think this is just his book on her. And it's wonderfully chatty and incredibly smart. Quentin Bell, all the Bells, were incredibly smart. No reason not to have this and to reread it, regardless of whether or not it's been superseded by Hermione Lee or anybody else. Regardless of that, this is something that I wanted. And I admit, I anthropomorphize my books, and I liked the feeling of saving this. It didn't have long to go. It was inching closer and closer to the dumpster in the back of the Brattle sale lot, and it was getting in worse and worse shape, so no one was going to take it. So I took it, and I will gladly reread it. Then we have work of history. Good Lord. When did this come out? I don't think I read this except when it first came out. 1970s? 1984, this came out. This is by Stephen Saunders Webb, and it's called 1676, The End of American Independence. There's that face I know so well. And the author's contention here is that in the wake of various major uprisings and Indian wars, the adolescent English colonies in the New World were suddenly greater centralized government control was imposed on them from overseas, from London. And that therefore 1676 was the end of American independence. It's kind of a bratty title, kind of what we would now call a clickbaity title. But so much water has flown under the Steve Reading Bridge since I first read this thing. Who knows what I'll make of it now? Never thought I'd see it again. So, like the what was it? The Dead Can Wait. Like there are a couple of books in this Brattle Hall that are pulling at me to read immediately, a lot more than others, and this is one. Can't wait to read this and see. I seem to remember it being really good. I don't think I agreed with a lot of its central tenets at the time. But then this next one is a great work of history. It belongs, if you are a fan of ancient Rome and you are okay with reading books that aren't slowing down for you, in other words, maybe you're really familiar with ancient Rome, maybe you've read your share of Roman histories, then this book has got to be on your list. It's come up in many library tours on this channel. I've praised it many, many times. It is not for beginners. It's deep, deep end of the pool Roman history, but it is so, so good and much necessary. I'm biased because when it came out, it espoused full-throatedly an opinion that I have held forever. The standard opinion in ancient Roman studies forever and ever was that the Roman Republic grew more and more choked with infighting and debilitated, etoliated families, and therefore was tottering and ripe for a fall when Julius Caesar knocked it off and turned it into a one-man empire. And I railed against that forever and ever and ever, saying that is absolutely not true. It's demonstrably not true. No government can stand what happened to the Roman Republic, which was ruling just fine until one person, Marius, decided to try to just break all the rules, break all the guidelines, and swear the military to his own personal defense instead of the state, to care more about himself than the state. And Marius begot Sulla, and Sulla begot Cinna, and Cinna begot a whole bunch of other people. And the ultimate culmination of that was Julius Caesar, the one who made it work. The one who actually made it happen, the one who drove the Senate out of Rome and set up one-man rule. Although he would have denied that. He certainly did. And that continued. But that was a series of blows. Any one of those blows would not have worked. It was a series of them in a row, a series of Rome finding so many vipers in her bosom that eventually the poison took. I hated the old conception, and I was full-throated in my defense of the truth, of the real conception. And a book came along that full-throatedly voiced that opinion in great detail. And it's this, The Last Generation of the Roman Republic by Eric Gruen. Big, thick thing, tons and tons of notes on every page. Hence the not for beginners thing. This is not just an ordinary tour through the Roman Republic. In this book, the author sets out the same idea, that this was a vital, living governmental organization. It wasn't tottering. It wasn't on its last legs. It was killed. It didn't die of natural causes. And I have a copy of this. I've shown it on this channel before, but it is reinforced with tape. The binding is cracked in a few places. It's falling apart, because I go back to this. This is one of, probably, if you were to make a shelf of truly great Roman histories, this would be on that list. It would be on that shelf. We get a lot of Roman histories there. Most of them are make-weight. They might be fun for a season, but they're not serious. And this is serious. This is the same kind of thing as The Roman Revolution by Ronald Sim, a book with which it is in pretty open dialogue in a lot of its parts. Because Sim did think that way. Largely, sometimes think that way, that the Roman Republic was ripe for falling. But this is in perfect condition. This book has not been in print in 50 years, 40 years. It'll never be in print again. And it's in perfect condition. So I had to get it. Even though it's a double, I had to get it. Okay. Well, speaking of doubles, this next one is a double of massive proportions. And I have an excuse. I got this thing from the publisher. And I got it as an advance copy with no cover artwork, and I think I wrote about it, but I didn't care about it, so I got rid of it. And then one of you sent it to me as a present, the trade paperback. And I was really grateful. I used it for a while, fell in love with it, but the trade paperback kept flopping everywhere. It's oversized. So the trade paperback, in this rare instance, didn't really work. You would have had to lay it open flat on a lectern. So I kept thinking, well, what I really want is a hardcover. So I got rid of that trade paperback, even though it was a gift from one of you. I got rid of it. If it's any consolation, I got rid of it as a gift to someone else, which made their day, because it was a poor student who couldn't afford this thing on their own. So I figured I was at least in good graces there if I was going to re-gift it. Today I found the hardcover. And it's this, the Royal Shakespeare Society's Collected Shakespeare. This beautiful thing. With somebody put plastic covering over the dust jacket. It's got the onion skin pages, tons and tons of notes and annotations. A collected Shakespeare, even at the time when I got it originally, I thought, this is a great collected Shakespeare. This is fantastic. I'm still a big fan of the second edition of the Riverside, but this will do just fine. There's no law that says you can't have 2 or 10 collected Shakespeares. And a hardcover with one of these plastic library coverings, I couldn't pass it up. Even though I knew it was going to be a trial to carry it back here. It was. But now it'll go, I will read a play, just to blood the thing. I will read one of its contents. I'll read the introduction. And then I'll probably read the introduction and then the play of Henry VIII. But then this next one, we've only got a couple left, don't worry. This next one is in rough shape. I will have to fix it. And it is an example of a phenomenon that has been going on for the last few years in my reading life that I don't quite understand. And it's about Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens, whose novels just don't do it for me. They just don't. I know that's heresy, but they just don't do it for me. Whereas I love reading about the man. I absolutely love reading. I love reading letters collections, big biographies, studies of him. I have studies of him as a father, as an editor, as a writer, as a freelancer. And I found another one of those. It's oversized. It's by Wolf Mankiewicz, and it's called Dickens of London. And it's one of these big illustrated walkthroughs of Dickens' life and times, what London was like, what his life was like, what he was doing. I have a feeling, you've got a photograph on the back there. You've got photographs on the front here. I have a feeling the Dickens of London might have been some sort of miniseries, maybe on the BBC or something, and that this is a companion volume to that. I don't remember anything called that, but it could be. Otherwise, I don't know what this would be doing there. But I'm going to fix up the cover here so that it isn't quite so creased or cracked or whatever. And then I will just read this. It will add to the pile of all the books about Dickens that I've read and loved, even though I don't like the books by Dickens. It's just kind of weird. And then finally, we're at the end. And this is a sweet tooth of mine. This is, I've told you many times before on this channel how much I love New Yorker cartoons. I think they're fantastic, especially the 20th century, the first 80 years of the New Yorker. I think they're just fantastic. I love them. I can't get enough of them. And in addition to New Yorker cartoon collections and themed volumes and whatnot, I also love to grab collected volumes of New Yorker artists, individual artists, where they have the whole book to themselves. Whether it's my favorite New Yorker artist, Helen Hokinson, or whether there are a whole bunch of other people, Charles Addams, I have a whole bunch of those, and a bunch of others. And I found one today that, again, is in perfect condition. Don't know, when did this come out? Well, this came out in 1979. Boy, it doesn't look that. The title is a quote from one of the captions on this artist, one of his paintings. It's called, "You do give such perfect parties, Alice. Is there anyone here you'd like to meet?" And the joke there is that the woman who gives perfect parties doesn't know the people who are attending them. But this is by Peter Arno. That's what the title of the book is. And it's just full of his artwork. Just there's no real text. It's just Peter Arno after Peter Arno. Now, some of these things, let me get you back to that one that stuck out. Yes, this. Oh, well, back to the drawing board. That is in every New Yorker anthology that ever exists. You have the bloodless engineer with the plans rolled up under his arm walking away from a horrendous crash. And all he cares about is that it's back to the drawing board. This model didn't work. But you see the ambulance running, the people are rushing there, and the general is looking at him furiously. It's meant to be kind of funny that this is all that the engineer cares about. And there are a bunch of other famous Arno cartoons in here, ones that have been reprinted many, many times. But the funny thing is, oh yes, of course, the most famous one of all, The Man in the Shower, where the shower has filled up so much that he's drowning. That became just a sensation. In fact, The Man in the Shower was the title of another Peter Arno collection I have in the little book room. But this will have lots and lots of Peter Arno that wasn't in the New Yorker, or that's never been reprinted in any of those New Yorker anthologies. And I love this sort of thing, absolutely do. So I will definitely just work my way through here. There was another one that I thought I spotted that's also fairly famous. It gets reprinted. Oh, this is really good. In the interest of science, Miss Mellish, I'm going to make a rather strange request of you. It's a niche thing. I'm aware of that. I love New Yorker cartoons. Peter Arno is one of my favorites. This is in perfect condition, so I grabbed it gladly. And that was it. That was a municipally responsible Brattle haul here on a day of book hauls on Booktube. So let's see if we can do a Steve Pyramid of this. I don't know if I can. We have Peter Arno. The title of the thing is, "You do give such perfect parties, Alice. Is there anyone here you'd like to meet?" We have Dickens of London. New look at an author that I love reading about, but that I don't love reading. We have Find of the Day, hardcover of the Royal Shakespeare Society Collected Shakespeare. Just fantastic. Can't wait to go through the notes and everything for this thing again. We have The Last Generation of the Roman Republic in a perfect condition, trade paperback, as sort of a backup for the trade paperback of mine that I battered all to hell and gone. We have Quentin Bell's biography of his aunt, Virginia Woolf. We have Nightwing by a very young Martin Cruz Smith. We have the 1676, The End of American Independence. We have History, a novel by Elsa Morante. We have Guapa by Saleem Haddad. I'll gladly reread this. We have The Dead Can Wait, a Dr. Watson thriller. We have a whole bunch of nautical stuff, nautical nonfiction. The Mainsail Haul, Once Is Enough, Around the Horn, and The Cruise of the Amaryllis. We have Imperial Governor by George Shipway, his first book. So all of you procrastinators, there's still hope. You can still get your stuff done. We have The Art Book by Faden, where I will lose time in that today. And finally, A Coward for Them All by James Kavanagh, the renegade priest, James Kavanagh. That was my Brattle haul for today. A huge number of books. I somehow managed to get them all back here. But I'm not going back to the Brattle this week. This is Monday, and I'm not going back to the Brattle this week. It will be at the earliest next Monday. So I felt justified in getting so many books, especially since I keep finding empty bookcases when I'm out with the bean. I'm up to 3 now. I keep finding free bookcases on the sidewalk that are perfectly good. All they need is to be cleaned, washed, dusted, and then you find a home for them, and then fill them up. So I've got plenty of room for these things. For one of the only times in my bookish life, I've got plenty of room. It was a ton of fun. So I will wrap this video up for now, and the next time we go to the Brattle, I'll probably get another armload of books. It could easily happen. It'll be in September, though. Oddly enough to feel, considering how hot and humid it is today. But anyway, that's my Brattle haul for today. I will see you soon. Thank you, Booktube.